So for your lamb, ewe lambs, and your doe kids that you kept back to add into your breeding program, you want to look at these guys and kind of take into consideration that they're probably still growing, especially if you're trying to breed them at the 7 to 10 month range. They have not fully matured out, and kind of a general rule of thumb for breeding these animals is that you want to try to get them up to approximately 70% of their mature weight, based upon what their breed is. So like for my Dorpers, typically a ewe, mature ewe is about 200 pounds, 180, 200 pounds. So I'd really like to see them at about, probably 120, 110, 120 on their weight before I actually breed them. And that's just so that they should hit their maturity and hit their mature weight at about the time that they're going to lamb or kid. Plus, this helps keep from being potentially a difficult birthing on them for their first birthing. Just one of the things, though, if you're trying to get your replacements in and get them into breeding condition, don't go crazy as they're growing, overfeeding them. If you do, you run into the potential that they're going to develop health problems. One of the things that if you're feeding them super heavy and they're super fast growing, they could potentially be depositing the fat into the udder. And then what happens when they actually get pregnant and they're getting ready to lamb or kid, they start producing milk, but they've got fat in there, so they're not able to produce as much milk. And so you may end up with an issue where, if you look at the udder, it's a nice big udder, but the capacity of it's reduced because of those fat deposits in the udder. Another problem, if you are feeding them up and you're overfeeding them, is their fat is going to be deposited. It's going to be building up pressure in that internal cavity, and that could potentially cause rectal prolapses. So trying to hurry them to get them into breeding condition probably isn't the greatest thing for them or for your program, because it has some potential detrimental side effects. Feed them out to where they're hitting their target maturity as what is for the breed average, and you shouldn't have that problem. The other thing too, if you're feeding or if you've got first time replacement ewe lambs and doe kids breeding, you want to feed them in a separate area. And the reason for this is their nutrition requirements are going to be a lot higher than your mature ewes and does. So they're going to require more feed. If you put them in with the mature ewes and does, you're going to run into possibly two problems. You're going to have the mature ewes and does that are going to fight them off and probably win at the food trough and getting more feed than what they need. And then you're going to end up with the problem that your ewe lambs and doe kids aren't getting the nutrition they require because they're having to compete with those mature ewes. Do yourself a favor and do them a favor and put them into a separate area during their pregnancy so that they get the feed they actually need. So with these guys, your average gestation length in sheep and goats will vary from approximately 142 days to 152 days, with the average being 147 days. Individual pregnancies may vary from 138 to 159 days. Keep in mind that you'll also see a difference in the lengths of the pregnancy based on the difference in breeds. Earlier maturing breeds tend to have shorter gestation periods, while late maturing breeds tend to have longer gestation periods. Ewes and does that are carrying multiples tend to have shorter gestation. Males and heavy birth weight lamb kids are usually carried longer than females. So just kind of some general information and food for thought. Even if you're using a breeding harness or marking harness, so you can see technically when they're bred, you may still have that. You may have 3 of them that are bred the exact same day, and you may have 1 to 2 day difference between each of them on when they actually lamb or kid out. And it's just due to some of these variances, and this is some of the more common reasons of why you'll see that variation. So with gestation, the most critical period for successful lambing and kidding is the period of early gestation, which is typically considered the first 30 days after fertilization. During this first 30 days of fertilization, the embryo is free-floating for approximately the first 20 days, can go up to 30 days. Embryonic implantation occurs typically between day 21 and day 30. And this is why you don't want to work them and stress them out during those first 30 days. And that's why you do it before breeding, with the working them, worming them, all that stuff, so that you don't put that stress on them, because stress can potentially cause them to abort. Your first 30 days is when most embryonic mortality occurs. After that, typically if you have embryonic or if you have fetus or abortions, typically you're looking at some kind of disease process, typically a reproductive disease process that occurs, and you won't see that until later in the pregnancy. One of the things you can do, if you have the access to it or have personnel that are trained in it and are willing to come out to do it, is use ultrasonic scanning to see if the sheep or goats are in fact pregnant. Typically, this can be done from days 35 to days 60 of gestation. This is nice, especially if you're in a larger operation. Even a smaller operation can benefit from this, because if you go out there and you put your ram or buck in, and yeah, you're using a harness, but they may not have always taken on that first breeding. Sometimes you have things going on. It may not have released the egg at the time. Typically, they'll breed on their second estrus cycle. So what this will do, though, is give you the ability to go in and verify that they are, in fact, pregnant. If they're not, then you can put them back in for a rebreed, instead of having to wait 5 months and realize, oh, that one wasn't pregnant. Just means that you're going to have more lambs or kids on the ground if you're able to verify that pregnancy early on. Your early gestation is typically the first 15 weeks of pregnancy, and your nutrition plane for this is just slightly above maintenance levels. They don't need a super ton of feed to be able to maintain that early gestation period. Mid-gestation, definitely want to make sure you've got some kind of feeding program in place, whether it's a supplement to the pasture, or if you're feeding, you're making sure that that feed is meeting their nutritional requirements for mid-gestation, and that your mid-gestation is where your placenta development takes place. Your late gestation, which is your last 4 to 6 weeks of pregnancy, is critical in nutrition requirements for the ewe or doe, as this is where the majority of the fetal growth occurs. And it'll put in an increased nutritional demand on the ewe or doe during this time. Poor diets during this can lead to pregnancy toxemia and milk fever, which, if you're not proactive and watching your flock, you can lose these guys easily during this time due to these two issues. Nutrition in late gestation affects the size and vigor of the lambs or kids at birth and the ability of the ewe or doe to produce milk. So late gestation nutrition is really, really important for these guys. And actually, talking about paturation, which is your lamb you're kidding, there's 3 stages to paturation. Your first stage is dilation of the cervix. Your second stage is expulsion of the fetus or fetuses. And then your third stage is expulsion of the placenta. Typically, stage 1 takes about 3 to 4 hours. You've got some of your first timers, or the ones that are multiple births. That first stage may take a little bit longer than that. Birth usually occurs within an hour or less from rupture of the first water bag. First timers or ones multiple may take longer. Generally, if the labor takes over an hour for mature ewes or does and over 2 hours for first timers, from the time that water bag ruptures, assistance typically is going to be required. The placenta is normally passed 2 to 3 hours after delivery is finished. In multiple births, there are separate afterbirths for each lamb or kid. And after the lamb or kid is born, the mother will lick and nuzzle it to begin the bonding process. So it's just kind of a good idea if you know when they're supposed to be, when they're due to birth, is just kind of keep an eye on them. Just so if they do start having issues, you can get in there and help them out. And at least try to get save everybody involved. You may not always do that. You may lose the lambs if you, depending on how difficult the birth is and how soon or how late you intervene.